Peonies, an old-time favorite. I always love giving a little bit of history about plants. It's so fascinating to find out how plants have traveled. But actually, the genus Peonia is actually native to the temperate and cold areas of the Northern Hemisphere. So in Western North America, there are some peonies that are native here to Western North America. So I did not realize that, but it's Peonia Californian or something. It's a wild peony, grows in the wild. So that's very interesting to know. But you can find species that are native to Asia, Europe, even Western North America. The first time we really, or for history's sake, will begin back in China, which began about 1,000 years BC. That's when they first started actually cultivating, because the wildflowers of Peonia were growing there everywhere. But then they started cultivating them because they found out that they actually could be used for medicinal properties. It says they could treat headaches, asthma, even childbirth pain with peony seeds and roots. So that's rather interesting. And then what we recognize as today's more modern hybrid peony came to Europe in the 6th century, and it came actually as a epilepsy remedy. So at the very beginning, they were using these plants for medicinal purposes. And I've got some pictures there of books, and I can't read what that says, but it's supposed to be like a medical book, a medical history in Chinese, ancient. Okay, well, long-lived perennial plants. They may last from 50 to even 100 years. Now, usually you read that it will say 20 to 30, but I know that we've got some that are over 40 years old, I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, they're over 40, maybe even over 50 years old. And I remember planting those for my dad. So yes, it's very possible. They live for the longest time. They produce large flowers in the spring, and those flowers always make a beautiful bouquet. But there are, as I found out, there's a myriad of species, colors, and shapes. And this one down on the right-hand corner, you see it looks sort of burgundy. That is actually the Peonia, I think it's the California, which is native to us. It's found in California and out west in some places. And I thought it looked quite pretty there. Okay, so let's just break down some types so that we know what we're discussing here today. Today, we're going to discuss, I'm going to focus on the garden peonies or herbaceous peonies. And herbaceous peonies die back to the ground each fall and winter. They are perennials, but all of the vegetation will die back to the ground every fall and winter. Then we also have tree, or really tree is a misnomer because they're really more like shrubs, the woody peonies. They have woody stems that go dormant, and those strong woody stems remain above ground and resprout for several years. Now, the other one that I have seen more in the last few years I've become aware of are the Ito hybrids, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but these are actually hybrids between woody and herbaceous peonies. And when I was researching all this information, I came across some information about people actually grafting. And that's how they do that. They graft the herbaceous material onto the woody material. So I thought, my goodness, this is really a lot more than I realized. But we're going to focus today on, just for time's sake, on the herbaceous peonies. So let's focus. Yeah, there we go. That's what we're focusing on. Now, the first thing I'm going to discuss is when we're siting, when you're thinking about, let's say you have new plants you're going to plant this fall. So where do you plant? They can tolerate a wide range of soil types, but of course, like anything, for the most part, they prefer well-drained soil. And with a pH of 6, between 6 and 7 is a good pH for them. If you don't know the pH of your garden, take a soil sample into your extension office. Every extension office in the state of Kentucky will offer soil samples. In some counties, they are free. In some counties, they charge a nominal price, but that is a good place to get a soil sample, and it also tells the pH. So peonies can bloom in light shade, but they do their very best when they have full sun and good air circulation. Also, if you're planting them together, like in a row, my dad liked to do that. He'd have a row of them out across the front yard. With other peonies or plants, you want to space them out at least 3 to 4 feet apart to help with air circulation, because air circulation around these plants, they're very dense plants to begin with, have a lot of green foliage. And you want that air to be able to get in there and move around between inside the plant, but also around the other plants, because that air circulation will help dry them off. It also goes a long way to help prevent fungal diseases and that sort of thing. Now, when you try to site them in your area of your garden, you want to think about if you can find a protected area, sort of like a little microclimate in your garden. That's the place to take. And what you're looking for is you're looking for an area that hopefully doesn't get hot afternoon sun, or if it does, there's like other shrubs or other plants around that will give shade to the peonies in that afternoon. Also, you want to keep them away from strong winds and rain, because they can make a mess of stems and blooms. And that's actually what happened to mine this year. They were really pretty and I enjoy them and I love them, but it rained so much that I would go out there and, you know, before I could get out there and maybe cut one or two, the rain would make a mess of its bloom. So site requirements, it's always good if you think about it, when you're getting ready to plant anything or you're planting your landscape, take and make a little map of your house. As you see here, this is from the University of Florida, and they've actually mapped out where the shade is, where the full morning sun and afternoon sun is. That must be like a south facing. They've got deep shade, full evening sun. That's the place where we would not want to plant our peonies. And so they've mapped it out. And that's always a good idea for you to do, especially when you're beginning to plant, you're going to plant some of these peonies. Now, peonies do require winter cold to flower. I never even thought about it, because here in Kentucky, we always have cold temperatures, but they will not grow. I think it's beyond, what do I want to say, 8, and they won't grow in 8 or 9. I know 9 for sure, because they're one of my daughter's favorite flowers, and she has moved to Florida and she's like, I can't grow them, Mom. So anyway, she misses them. The flower size will decrease due to root competition if you've got nearby trees and shrubs, so you want to consider that. And then also you want to try to avoid locations where peonies have been grown before. And the reason for that is that there's always a chance, of course, all of these things are in the environment just waiting for the perfect conditions. But if peonies have grown there before, there's always a chance that when you have this new plant growing, that when the conditions are right, say the right kind of water, the right temperature, and also we'd have the peony there, that, you know, fungal diseases and that sort of thing could arise. Sort of like a rotate your vegetable garden kind of thing. Now, planting. The best time to plant peonies is in early fall, like September and October. If you plant them in the spring, which is what I did the very first time I ever planted them, we planted them in the spring. It might even been going into the summer just a little, because I think my dad got these plants off a discount. So anyway, but if you plant them in spring, they may not bloom for a year or two. And also, it depends on how big the tubers are. You know, you can get some that are grown in pots. They're more expensive, but usually they'll guarantee at least a bloom or two for the next season. And if you just buy the bare tubers and they're small, the smaller the tube, the longer it takes for it to grow up. But when you purchase divisions, we're not talking about pots now, but when you purchase those tubers, those divisions, you always want to look and make sure that you have 3 to 4 eyes. And these look like little knobs on the tubers around where the crown would be. Because these are divisions with only 1 or 2 eyes, divisions with 1 or 2 eyes normally take 3 to 5 years to grow and to flower properly. So the more eyes you have, the better it is for guaranteeing more and earlier flowering. Of course, as always, make sure the divisions are free from rot when they are planted, and you don't want to plant a mushy thing. However, with these are almost like a potato. You can trim away some of the soft spots if it's not taking out your eyes. If your eyes are starting to get soft and mushy, then it's too late. So planting, you want to dig a hole large enough to contain the plant roots. Now, if you have a plant that's in a container, you want to go ahead and remove the plant from the container and place it in the hole. If not, with just bare root tubers, then you still will place it in the hole, but there's a certain placement in how you have to put your soil back in. You want to make sure that the eyes, remember those little buds, are no more than 2 inches below the soil surface. And then also make sure to plant the crown, and the crown is like right below the eyes. You want to make sure that it's just like 2.5 to 3 inches below the soil surface. You do not want to plant them too deep. You should bear on the side where you're planting them a little shallow, other than too deep, because they will fail to bloom if planted too deep. Occasionally, I've had people that come in and say, we have some, but they never bloom. And it was probably because they were planted too deep. Now, if you have some established peonies that aren't blooming, you want to wait until the fall. And during the fall, you can dig them up and then replant them at the proper height and probably divide them as well. You only have to divide peonies, say, maybe every 10 to 15 years or even more than that. Normally, they're pretty happy the way they are. But if you do divide them, when you put them back in the ground, make sure you have it at the proper height. Okay, so after we plant, you want to water it well. Newly planted peonies, just like any other plant, trees, shrubs, that sort of thing, need more water for the first season they are planted. They're trying to get established. You want to water slowly and deeply. You want a long soak for them. You just don't want to go out there with a bucket and go dump it on and go, there you go, or take a hose and sort of spritz it over them and go, okay, that should be good enough. No, we need that water to get way down and soak slowly into the soil. Peonies are developing very long tap roots when they're getting started. And those tap roots probably is because one of the reasons why they are able to live so long is because they're way down in there soaking up as much nutrients as they can in water. Of course, when you do water, you don't want to overwater. So if it's been raining like it has been here lately around here, I would probably say they probably don't need any water right now. So you just sort of use your common sense there. Because overly wet conditions can cause root rot, especially if you put them in a soil that has poor drainage. But remember, you're not going to do that because you're going to go around and site with your garden and make sure you have a place where there's pretty good drainage. But a lot of us, however, do have clay soils. And clay soils are not known for having the best drainage. So you want to sort of walk a tightrope there. You want to water them, but you don't want the water to stay there in the hole and be caught in the hole, because that will cause root rot. And then once they're established, they're relatively drought resistant. I don't think I ever remember, and I have actually planted some. I planted them after I planted them. Oh gosh, this has been probably about 20 years ago. And I've never watered them since then. You know, they just do their thing. So usually you don't have to water them or worry about them unless there's a really extreme drought and you notice some sort of flagging, wilting, then you might want to give them some water. But I've never noticed that happen. Also, you want to avoid excessive nitrogen fertilizer. Everybody wants to throw fertilizer in that hole when they plant or give them some fertilizer in the spring or whenever. But really, nitrogen fertilizer especially encourages the foliage to grow. And usually that's at the expense of the blooms. And it's also at the expense of the roots. So only put nitrogen in your garden if you have a soil test that says you need nitrogen. You don't want to just say, okay, every year I'm going to throw out some nitrogen, especially if it's in your yard and you normally have your yard fertilized. If you do it or you have a company that comes in and fertilizes it ever so often, all of your plants that are in your landscape there around your fertilized yard probably do not need any fertilization or especially excessive nitrogen. Now, occasionally, or if you're planting, some people will throw a little bit of bone meal in the hole and mix it up with the soil, you know, before they totally plant it down in there. But now bone meal and that sort of thing hopefully will help establish some of the blooms and help blooming and that sort of thing as well. Okay, I'm gonna skip a Nope, I didn't. So I skipped one. Okay, here are just a few little tips. Okay, after your peonies have bloomed, and right now I have some in my garden that look this way, you want to go ahead and snip off those old blooms. If you can get them when they're old blooms and they're fading, that's a good time to snip them off. Or if you see these seed pods, or seed pods developing, you definitely want to go ahead and snip those off. Because as with any type of plant, fruits, vegetables, flowers, that sort of thing, they are putting all of their energy for the time to produce those seed pods, to produce seeds so that they can ensure that the next generation, if something happened to them, will be living. It's all about produce. But when they do that, that takes a lot of extra energy. So if we're wanting to keep these peonies living for a long time, then you can deadhead them or snip off. Generally, I'll go out there with a pair of clippers. Last year, I found that one of my grandsons thought that was the best thing in the world to do. So, you know, he'd do a few and then he'd get tired, but then later he'd go, I don't have anything to do, Granny. Hey, you want to cut some more blooms? And he'd run right out there. And he did a pretty good job too. I watched him though, to make sure he was doing it correctly. Yeah, so when you cut these blooms off, it allows that energy that would have gone to produce the seed. Finally, it is stored in the plant to help build a healthier plant. Okay, problems, pests, and diseases. Due to heavy flowers and buds, many plants may need to be staked. And as you can see there on the side, that's actually a picture from an Amazon ad for that basket or almost a tomato cage like stake there. That one looks pretty fancy. I've had the ones with just the wires. Now the wires that you see there on the bottom of the right, those are single blossoms. So, you know, if you have those, you could go ahead and use them. But if you're going to have to buy some, I wouldn't say buy these for your peonies. You need more like the ring types. And they're coming all price ranges and that sort of thing. And there's some that are made out of the same wire, like the ones that hold the individuals. And of course, usually they're a little bit cheaper. But remember, those strong winds or rain can wreak havoc with stems and blossoms. So try to plant them in a protected area. And when we're talking about problems, pests, and diseases, peonies are relatively pest and disease resistant, with the exception of Okay, botrytis blight. This causes withered buds, wilting leaves. It attacks the stems, leaves, and the flower buds. So you may see that top picture there, you know, some browning. Some of that stuff on there is like actually dead flower material left over that was withered by the botrytis blight and that sort of thing. Also, you may develop leaf blotch, and you see that second picture below the botrytis. It has all those little brown, either brown to purplish spots on them. You may even see some of those on the stems. And then, of course, powdery mildew. I had never had powdery mildew on my peonies until last year. And they all of them just about had them. So yeah, and it looks like white dust on leaves. But last year, and especially the year before last, it seems like here in Scott County, powdery mildew was getting on everything. So, you know, it was a good year for it, but we did have the powdery mildew. Now, I said normally these aren't a problem. And ants are commonly seen on peony blooms, or on the buds, actually. I should change that to say buds. But they are not a threat to the health of the plant. They're actually attracted to that sort of a sweet nectarish kind of thing that is produced in the peony buds as they're getting ready to bloom. So when you see ants, you just smile and say, hey guys, have at it, because they will not harm. Diseases are rarely lethal to peonies, and can be managed by. Now, this is the reason that the diseases, of course, you know, they won't kill your plant. They may look at sort of unsightly. I have a couple that had those little spots on it. But here's what you have to do: the diligent removal of all above ground plant material each fall. Now, after they finish blooming here in the spring, May, June, right now, that's when you want to go back and cut off the seed heads and any blossoms. That saves the plant from going ahead and trying to do that, but you leave the green shrubby material. And actually, they're not unattractive. You can leave them there. I mean, you know, they're just sort of in the background. They provide great screens for other things, you know, like if you have a garden, I try to do this, where you have different things coming up at different times. Once the peonies have bloomed, and then something else is coming up behind it or around it that's taking over, or even in front of it, that's taking over that space, you know, to produce blooms and that sort of thing. But you want to remove in the fall, after the frost, the stems. You don't want to leave the stems there. Also, you want to have proper spacing of the plants for good air circulation. Air circulation is very important, and avoid excessive watering. And all of these: diligent removal of above ground plant material, proper spacing for air circulation, and avoiding excessive watering. Those are three of the things that are needed for these funguses or diseases that are there. They're already there in your garden. It's just a matter of time, usually, or a lot of times, whether or not it gets the right conditions. And that's usually like very crowded. There's not enough air circulation. They're getting wet and damp, and they stay that way. Temperature plays a part. And so that could cause those spores and some of the funguses to bloom. I don't know what you call it. I forget. But anyway, so it'll cause those to start growing and producing more. And that's usually when you start seeing your diseases. So as long as you work to keep, you want the plant well watered, but you also want it to have plenty of air space, so that air dries them off, like from morning dew and after a rain and that sort of thing. The stems also will provide, and some of the leaf material that has fallen off after a frost, if you leave it there in your garden, it provides a hiding place or a home for these fungal spores and that sort of thing, and even insects and that sort of thing for other plants possibly. But it provides a home for them to overwinter in. So it's like, oh, this is great. We'll just stay here. So that's why you always want to clean up afterwards, and not only for peonies, but anything in your vegetable garden or in your landscape garden. Now, here are a few tips, and I probably have repeated myself a little bit, but peonies are usually a short blooming perennial flower, and they are. They have beautiful blooms, but sometimes they don't last very long. But a great way to have longer bloom time is to grow different varieties of peonies that bloom at different times, just about like your spring bulbs. You know that your crocus will be the first to come up, and then you'll have some daffodils, and then tulips will follow, that sort of thing. Same thing with your peonies, with the herbaceous peonies. You can buy different varieties that will bloom at different times. And that way you get a little overlap, and it lasts, making the bloom time last a little longer. I really noticed that in my garden this year. I had some that were very early, and they were my oldest peonies. They bloomed and did really well. And then later, some of the younger peonies that I'd planted recently, within the last 2 or 3 years, had started blooming too. So I thought, I don't know if it's because of the variety. I'll have to go back and look at that, or if it's just because of the age. But I did have a longer bloom time at different spots in the garden. After they finish blooming, there's a nice mound of foliage. Do not cut that back to the ground. You want to let the shrubbery or the foliage, the green foliage, grow all summer long, because it's making and storing energy for the plant, and that plant will need it for next year's bloom. Also, remember that peonies do not respond well to transplanting and reestablish slowly. So, but if you do need to divide and replant some, or someone gives you some, or you're moving, I've known people that do this. They were moving, selling the farm, but they wanted to take Granny's peonies with them, at least a few of them. They didn't want to leave them there because they've been there forever. So you divide and replant them only after they become really crowded, or if it's necessary. So usually that's only after 10 or 15 years. And fall, of course, is the best time to divide. And you want to divide them when the swollen red buds are clearly visible. Now, this is sounds like after the stems and everything have died back. So you want to make sure that you have some of those little red buds sticking up out of the ground, or very close to the surface. You probably won't see them out of the ground. Here's a nice little thing I just ran across. I thought, well, that's good. I'll just throw that in there. But for just the tubers, sometimes when you buy them, I've bought some collections or whatever, and they're just the roots or the tubers for them. It'll show you year 1, they may look like that. Year 2, you have plenty of shoots and maybe one blossom. Year 3, you have more flowers and it's filled out a little. And usually by year 4, then you've got a plant there that looks like it does at maturity. You can sort of say, yeah, it's mature. Okay, those red shoots, this is what we're looking for. I see these in springtime, and that's a good reminder that, oh my goodness, warm weather is coming, when you start to see these little red buds. But I threw this in there to just help you see how this plant is made. So that's what you're going to be looking for, is red buds. And then you see the old stems sticking up, and it looks like they have been cut back a little, but maybe, I don't know if that's enough or not. And then that area, when you read something that says the crown, that area is that whole plant area that encompasses the stems and the little buds. All right, most peonies have unforgettable fragrance and are unexcelled for cutting, and may live 40 to 50 years, even as long as 100 years. So you can see here, this is an old house, dilapidated, but somebody's peony bushes are blooming out front. And I'm sorry, I have to admit, I doctored this. That's not really what it was, but I just made it just to get a point across it. These things, once you plant them, for the most part, you'll leave them there for a generation or 2 after you. Okay, so herbaceous perennials are sorted in the way we decide to sort these is by types of flowers. And you'll have the single, the semi-double, the double, and then there's also the there's a double actually, I think, and then there's Japanese and anemone. And I'm just going to show you very quickly because I think we're running out of time. I don't want to keep you too long, but some favorites. Here, this is the one that I know and remember my grandmother having them. My dad did too. I think I have at least one now, but it's Festiva Maxima. It's always a fluffy, big double white peony. And the really cool thing about it is that in the center, it'll have those little red edges around some of the petals. And this is one that those blooms can get really heavy. So you may have to stake them if it comes up, because they will sort of flop over sometimes. Coral Sunset, a really pretty one. It can take a little shade. It's a vibrant color of coral, and it's a semi-double. So you can sort of tell it's not quite as full as the Festiva Maxima, but they're full. They usually don't require staking, but that sort of makes sense because their blooms are not quite as full as some of those heavier ones. And usually they're the very first one to bloom. This one is a Francois Ortega. I think that's how I know Francois, but the last name I'm not sure. But anyway, this is another one that's partial shade to full sun, because sometimes it's hard to find the very best places. Like all that sun, you have to share it with a little shade. But this is a deep red velvety variety. It almost looks a little more fuchsia there than red. But this is an old one. It's over 150 years old. It's been in gardens for 150 years. Again, it'll need staking because it has big, heavy blooms. Solange is really pretty. It's not flashy, that's for sure. But you have a big, fluffy double peony. But the thing is that it's white. But if you're out there just sort of walking around in your garden, you'll look and you can see like the slightest blush of pink, and it's not really that you can pinpoint it, but you just know it's there, sort of a glow of pink there. I think are really pretty. They do require staking, and they make really beautiful cut flowers. Pillow Talk is a pink peony. It is a double flowering, which means it has, you can see those blossom petals there that are sort of singles, and then it has another flower more fluffy in the center. That's what they call the double flowering. It's pink double blossoms. It will need staking. This is another one. Felix and Felice it's misspelled up there. As much as I've looked at this thing, I didn't catch that. But anyway, it is Felix Cruz, and it likes partial sun and shade. It is a fuchsia, more of a fuchsia color, or a magenta, even fuchsia to magenta. It has lots of layers of petals. This one is a fragrant variety. Some of them are fragrant, and some of them, not so much, but this one does have a fragrance to them that you could catch usually. These two are good cut flowers. I think they're all good cut flowers myself, but they will need to be staked probably. Edulus superba is another herbaceous perennial. It likes partial shade, or it can take that. It's an extra early blooming, and I think these ones that can take some shade, usually that's because early you don't have a lot of tree leaves on, so it's that kind of partial shade. It's a really old heirloom variety, very fragrant. It's what they call a medium-sized double flower. It makes great cut flowers and may require a little staking. This is a pretty one of the different ones, Do Tell, and it is a Japanese style because it has that inflorescence in the center there, and it combines pale pink and darker pink and that sort of thing. It has stamenoids. They're not actually stamens, but they're stamenoids that are pale pink to almost red. Has very sturdy stems as well, and usually doesn't require staking. And the reason for that, well, it's not as heavy as a flower as the others. Goldilocks is another a pretty yellow, and I seem to like those that have like a little surprise in the center, which Goldilocks does. It has a it'll be sort of a buttery yellow, but then on the inside you may see a little bit of red on some of them, and then as it blossoms, that sort of fades a little bit, but you can see it. These are double flowers, so they usually require staking as well. And that is the end of the program.